We're going to get Barry up now, so let's give a huge round of applause as we hear what he's got to say.
I made a special small card so I could hold it in my hand while I was speaking. And now I'm looking and I'm thinking, I can't read all of this. This is too small. So if I'm going like this, it's just the age that's speaking. So for most of life, I think I felt unsettled, like something was missing. Going through life didn't feel like everything was sorted, almost like I was stuck in a way. And I read through Psalm 107, and there was actually a verse there that I thought, that pretty much describes what most of life looked like for me. And it says the following: "Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story, those he redeemed from the hand of the foe, those he gathered from the west and the east and the north and the south. Some wandered in desert wastelands, finding no way to a city where they could settle. They were hungry and thirsty, and their lives ebbed away." And for me, that's what it felt like. It felt like I had this life, but it was just ebbing away. I was hungry and thirsty for something that I didn't even know what it was. I grew up in church, so it wasn't like I was looking for Jesus and then found him somewhere in life. I was born, I was christened in church, I grew up in church. And although I was in church and grew up in church, I was never close to God. It was very formalistic in a way. It was as if I was just going through the motions. And even though I was very involved in church, I never really had a deep relationship with God. It felt like God was quite far off and impersonal for me. And I was very involved in church. It wasn't even that I missed that because I wasn't involved. I was part of the youth in church. I led the high school youth in church. At university, I was an elder. I was a deacon in church. I led the university youth. So I was very, very busy with God's stuff, but never really connected with God himself. And after university, I studied mechanical engineering, and then I started working. And I was 2 years into my working career, and then I started studying theology part-time, doing Greek and Hebrew at night on my own, which is probably one of the worst things you can think out for yourself. And I started a Bible school in our church that I was in at that stage, teaching people through the Bible, the 66 books of the Bible in 1 year. And we ran that Bible school for 6 years. And so I knew a lot about God, but I didn't have a relationship with God, even though I was in church. And that was, I think, looking back now, I couldn't see it then, but looking back, this was because of shame. Shame ruled my life. I was so stuck in my shame that there was no way for me to connect to a God. Even a God that I was told loved me, I would always have this little caveat in my mind saying, well, yeah, God loves me, but can he really love me if I'm really stuck in the way that I'm stuck in? And so how was I stuck? Well, I was stuck in sexual sin from a very young age. I was compulsively masturbating when I was 6 years old already. I was exposed to pornography when I was 9 years old. A friend of mine brought pornography to school. I don't know where he got it, probably from his dad or his uncle or older brother. I think those things were still illegal at that stage. That's how old I am. But I went home with that. And for years after that, that was hidden in my room, and I would continually go back and look at those photos over and over and over again. And it became almost like an obsession for me. And not only that, then I went to university. And suddenly I started drinking heavily. So alcohol became a problem. And pornography became rampant because that was the start of the internet when I was first year. Internet just came out. So suddenly you could go onto the internet and get anything your heart desired. I can remember that there were even guys in the hostel staying with me that were exchanging pornography with one another. And so there was just this whole new avenue, and I got stuck even deeper. Not only that, I started to engage sexually as well at university with multiple people. And then I started working, earning money, starting to adult in a way. But because I was earning money, I started acting out with prostitutes. And so I was stuck in that lifestyle for 12 years, where it wasn't that I wanted to be in that lifestyle. There was something of me that didn't want to be in that bondage, and yet I couldn't get out. And so my life was driven by shame on the one side, because I could see these things that I was doing as wrong, but I couldn't stop. And there was a deep shame connected to it, because how do I even tell anybody about that? It was like, even I can remember when I was like 6 years old already, starting to masturbate compulsively. I remember even as a 6-year-old boy who couldn't even understand what he was really busy with, the deep feeling of shame that was connected to that. And so I would hide that already from very early on. But then there was also the other side of me trying to earn with God. And I think that's why I was so involved with many ministries and things in church. Because I was trying to fix myself up so that God would see me trying hard enough that He would come and actually free me from the sin, that He would come and magically take it away so that I wouldn't struggle with it anymore. And I remember many times when I would be crying out to God, on my knees crying, saying, God, just take this away. I don't want this. I don't want this lifestyle. I don't want to be in it. And that never happened. God never answered that prayer. And I'll get into it a little bit more later on why I think God didn't answer that prayer. But basically, I was stuck in a life of whenever I was feeling overwhelmed, whenever my emotions were becoming too much for me, I would run to my place of comfort, which was sexual sin. And I would go and try and find some way of coping with life there. And then what would happen is I would be so deeply shamed because of what I was doing that there would be a fear coming out saying, but you'd better make sure that nobody knows what's going on. And so I just had this facade that I had to put up again and say, hey, I need to make sure nobody knows, so I need to do my church stuff better. I need to do my religion stuff better so that no one will even guess what I'm struggling with. And sitting there doing those things is a lonely place because you can't share with anyone. And in that lonely place, what happens? Life starts becoming too much for you. And so you run back to your place of comfort. And over and over and over, you're in that cycle, stuck in it. And so I told you that I was begging God to free me from this. But that didn't happen. And so, of course, I thought, hey, man, I'm going to make my own plan. Because I thought that sex was my biggest need. And so I thought, I can solve that. I can get married. And then that's going to solve the whole problem for me. And so I did that. I got married. And you know what? My crisis became someone else's crisis. And my crisis became bigger. When we were married and when we were dating, I didn't act out with prostitution because at that stage I was saying to myself, no, I'm going to solve this in a way that's godly. But because I was still stuck in my compulsive masturbation and prostitution and those cycles happening for me even while being married, meant that I was completely disconnected and unavailable to my wife. And this led to conflict in our marriage. And so what happens? Conflict causes crisis. Crisis pushes me to my old ways of coping. And in the end, I found myself acting out with prostitutes again while being married. And the shame became unbearable because of that. And so marriage didn't solve my problem. It actually enlarged my problem, that so much so that I got to a place where I didn't see any way out than committing suicide. And so I was starting to plan my suicide because I was just thinking there's no way that I can actually get out of my situation, and there's no way that I can even see that God's going to help me in this. But what did happen is I got to a place where I got tired of trying to fix myself. I got tired of trying to work things out, making my own plans. Enter God into that moment. He was the one who met me in my place of deepest need and deepest despair. And I think what happened for me, my prayer changed there because I was in such a rock bottom place, knowing that my only option is actually taking my own life. And I think for the first time in my life, I actually started praying a prayer to God saying, God, do whatever you need to do. Not the prerequisite of, God, just take the sexual sin out of my life and leave all the rest there. God was saying it's all broken. I need to fix the whole mess, which is your life. And so for the first time, I think I got to a place where I was saying to God, do it all. Whatever the consequences are, help me. And so that's what God did. He helped me. He helped me find a counselor. I got his number by the most odd way, and I don't have time to talk about that now. But I got to this counselor, and in my own broken way of thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to solve this now, I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the counselor, I'm going to tell him everything that happened, and then once I've told him everything that's happened, we're going to pray a prayer, and God's magically going to heal me. Okay? That didn't happen. What did happen is this counselor had wisdom in working with guys like me who were stuck in sexual addiction. And so he sat me down and we started speaking, and he started asking me questions, detailed questions. And he didn't let me wriggle out. And then he took me into prayer, where he took me to pray that out with God in the most gruesome detail. It was the roughest session I've ever done in my life. And I remember after I did that session, I said to myself, I'm never going back to that counselor. He knows way too much. But what happened is 2 weeks later, God had me back in his office, and that's where my journey started. Walking out of my sin by being known. And maybe you guys know the verse 1 John 1 verse 5 to 7. It says this. This is the message we have heard from him and declared to you. God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. If we claim to have fellowship with him and yet walk in the darkness, we lie and do not live out of the truth. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, purifies us from all sin. And that's what actually happened. I actually had someone who had enough knowledge to call me into the light. Being one who confessed my sin to God, being known to him as a counselor. And for the first time, at the age of 35, in 2011, I met Jesus. I met Jesus as one who taught other people for years about Jesus. Because Jesus was the one who met me as I stepped into the light. And he was the one who purified me from all my sin. It didn't stop there, though. My counselor was wise enough that he was not going to be the only one walking with me, and I had to find trusted people in my life that I could share this with as well. And so 2 of my friends had the dubious pleasure of having to hear what my life really looked like. But you know what happened? As I was sharing with them, as I was speaking out what my life really looked like, as I was coming again and again with failures, as I was walking on this journey, they loved me in that place. They had grace for me in that place. And it clicked for me suddenly that if these two men who were themselves sinful could love me and have grace for me in my struggle, how much more does God have that? And that changed everything for me. Suddenly I realized God was on my side. And I realized that God was not about just getting me to stop it. He was about relationship. He didn't want me to sort out my sexual addiction so that I would have relationship with him or could have relationship with him. He wanted to have relationship with me so that that would heal me from sexual addiction. Calling me into the light meant that I had to tell my wife as well what was happening. And of course, that caused massive trauma for her. And the consequence of that was that we did get a divorce. So I had a lost marriage. I lost friends, good friends as well, that found out what I had done because I was sharing it with people, and I lost them. My work was in complete crisis. I ended up, as a 35-year-old, staying in my brother's spare room for 3 months, having to figure out what am I going to do with life, feeling like a complete failure. And yet, during this time, God was relentlessly pursuing me. He was the one who was walking with me, even though I was feeling the full brunt of the consequences of what I'd done. And so God didn't spare me the consequences, but he was with me in the consequences. And so God redefined relationship for me. And it's been 10 years, 11 years since that first session that I had. And I think what I've learned of God has changed my whole life. Suddenly, I realized that I have a Father who relentlessly pursues me. But I also have a Redeemer who meets me in my deepest shame. And I've got a God who's a friend who lives inside of me, making it possible for me to make different choices in life. And so over 11 years, God has been changing me little by little. But when I look back, I am astounded by how much he's done over that time. And it feels like the little steps that I've been seeing almost doesn't add up to where he's taken me in total, but that's how God works. God's even made my biggest place of struggle, sexual addiction, he's made that my ministry. He's made it something where I can walk with other people who struggle with that. People who struggle with identity crisis. People who struggle in relationship, because all of these things are deeply connected. And now I can walk with others just as God's walked with me. Life's not perfect. I still have struggles. They look completely different now. But God is still the same. He meets me in my struggle, and he uses my struggle so that I would find him. And so I started with Psalm 107, and I want to end with Psalm 107. So the next verses to it says this: Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way to a city where they could settle. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind, for he satisfies the thirsty and fills the hungry with good things. And that's what God has really done for me. He's changed my thirst and hunger to feeling satisfied. But I had to go through a whole process of allowing him to do that. And that process did not look the way that I wanted it to look. And so my question tonight is, what about you? I don't know what it is that causes shame in your life. Maybe you're listening to me speaking and saying, some of those things sound very similar to what I'm struggling with. Maybe you listening to this and saying, I'm not struggling with that at all. But maybe your shame comes from relationships that you are in. Maybe your shame comes from what other people have done to you. And so all of us, through our shame, find our ways of coping in life and hiding ourselves from one another, so that no one would really know how ashamed we feel or how needy we feel. And tonight what I want to say to you is, whatever it is that you might be struggling with, whatever it feels like you've got to cover this up so that no one would see it, whatever it is that when on a Sunday evening when someone comes and says, how are you doing? And you're saying, oh, I'm fine. And you hear that little voice in your heart saying, I'm not fine. God is saying, I want to be the one who steps into that space with you. But it's going to take a choice of being known. You've got to step into the light and be known. And I know that can be scary. The fear of, what would people do if they really know what a mess my life is? Maybe it's the fear of, but this thing that I've got, if I've got to give this up, I don't know how I cope. And yet God's saying, I'm bigger than that. And so tonight, I want to ask that maybe you just start considering, God, is there someone safe in my life that I can tell? That I can just start sharing and saying, hey, I need you to help me pray. And if that's the only thing that you can take out of this testimony of mine, then that's a good thing. And so I really pray that God would lead you and really show you what it is. What is that next step that you can take? Thank you.